on my podcast started a thread on a forum that he runs at Facebook about his interview and discussion with me on my Hypnosis Weekly podcast. People discussed his views, his stance, and those who had tuned in gave him some feedback and so on. And as typically happens, one of the podcast's main aims is to stimulate debate. Another former guest on the show had said, I enjoyed hearing you give evidence-based a good hard slapping, and for all the correct reasons. And he said, I could almost feel Adam twitch, as I know this is a thing of his. And, I laughed, and this is very observant. I do often have to conceal the fact that I'd love to interject and refute elements of what some of my guests say, because, I do have major differences with them on occasion. However, each episode, it's not about me, it's about my guests and about me allowing them to have their say. It's also a major theme of the podcast to embrace diversity. And, I don't think anyone would want to be a guest on my Hypnosis Weekly podcast if all I did was highlight major flaws in things they've said, according to what evidence suggests. The comment had no ill intention behind it, as far as I'm aware, but it does illustrate something that I feel really strongly about within the field of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And that's what this video is about today. I posted an image and a quote from Isaac Asimov, whose books I love, on my Facebook page some time ago. And it goes something along the lines of this. I've memorized it. There is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. This strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. Now, when I posted it, I also suggested that if we were to exchange the word United States for field of hypnotherapy in this particular Asimov quote, then, go and visit popular hypnosis forums and experience for yourself how averse the majority of frontline hypnotherapists are to evidence-based and responsibly researched due diligence when it comes to what they do. There is an absolutely brilliant video clip featuring Barack Obama that you can go and find online, and it's entitled "Ignorance is Not a Virtue." And I'd love you to listen to sound bites from that speech, because they really articulate a lot of my own feelings with regards to the field of hypnotherapy. Whereas Obama is referring to politicians and the global impact of such mindsets. The opening words of the Barack Obama speech go along the lines of facts, evidence, reason, logic, understanding of science. These are the qualities you want to believe in. And I would then interject and add my own completion of the sentence by adding, these are the qualities you want hypnotherapists to be beholding. There's a fair amount of anti-intellectualism and sneering at evidence-based approaches within the field of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And often those who speak up and out against it really offer very weak and implausible arguments against the evidence. Like they somehow know far better than researchers about research design, or like they know far better than the people who have studied at very high levels for years and years and made major contributions and breakthroughs and advancements to our field. Maybe it's just a trend apparent in society in general currently. In the book, the Dumbest Generation, author Mark Bauerlein reveals how an entire generation of youth is being dumbed down with a seeming aversion to reading anything of substance, and an addiction to the drivel that's poured out via social media. Yeah, I think the vast majority of hypnotherapists are of a different generation, and we can't really use this as an excuse. Why is there this disturbing trend of anti-intellectualism in the hypnotherapy field then? Why is there such a chasm between frontline hypnotherapists and the academics and researchers within the field of hypnotherapy? Why do so many hypnotherapists attempt to replace intellectualizing with ignorance and a seeming self-righteousness? The journalist Charles Pierce, author of Idiot America, suggests a particular perspective. And he says that the rise of Idiot America today represents, for profit mainly, but also, and more cynically, for political advantage in the pursuit of power, the breakdown of the consensus that the pursuit of knowledge is good. And it also represents the ascendancy of the notion that the people who we should trust the least are the people who best know what they're talking about. And in the new media age, everybody is an expert, according to this particular author, so-called. There's much here that feels relevant to me within the field of hypnotherapy, for sure. Many do have a financial interest in ensuring their own perspective is not questioned, for sure. Also, the interest that keeps them being a revered expert with elevated status within the field. I mean, who would respect those who are shown to be outmoded, outdated, and superseded by science? It's in their interest to keep promoting what they deem to be the right way as the only way. Within the field of hypnotherapy, I often hear these kind of loud, dissenting voices claiming that their own purely subjective experience is somehow more correct than formalized evidence. Often I hear that results are all that matter, getting therapeutic results. However, understanding precisely how those results were achieved would enable effective measurement and correct replication and teaching of such. And that's the reason that expectation is often measured in hypnosis research, for example, because the level of expectation is likely to affect the results that occur. Although the two have strong links, in order to measure the effects of hypnosis, we have to take into account factors such as levels of expectation and be aware of how that might affect the results. Likewise, a huge number of other factors exist in a therapy room or classroom that have not been extrapolated or examined without bias. And so making assumptions about how the results were gained may not be an effective way to teach someone else to get the same results. Teaching just based upon anecdote and exclusively based upon experience is not necessarily useful and is filled with lots of potential problems. And that brings me nicely on to a strong point. Often I hear that practical skills are far more important than knowledge and academic understanding. In fact, I read recently on a website for a hypnotherapy training school that they do not cover much theory in class because they believe that practical skills are far more important and class should be used that way. They have obviously not noted that all of the most important surgeons, doctors, physicians, oncologists, psychiatrists, psychologists in the world had to sit in lectures being taught the underpinning theory prior to practical applications. Glibly referring to certain debates and discussions as merely academic is a common thought. Yet further evidence tends to suggest that correct understanding improves outcomes with hypnotherapy. And this all seems to make perfect sense to me. I hope it does to you. But why on earth does it not make sense to large swathes of the field of frontline hypnotherapists and hypnotherapy training schools? Why is there such a sense of anti-intellectualism and not more adherence to evidence-based or erudition? Perhaps it's because so much myth, misconception, and misinformation is invested in so heavily in this field, and it's then mindlessly regurgitated without implying any critical thinking. Maybe it's because the evidence-based message is being dismissed by those regurgitating the myth and the misconceptions, and their own authority leaves a firm impression upon those who willingly listen. Perhaps it is because it would involve us all having to read much more, research more, and explore deeper, which doesn't appeal to those who would rather lazily just do as they were taught and be spoon-fed. Maybe it's because people just do not wish to admit that they do not know best, that it is an incredibly bitter pill to swallow to think that the notions they hold so dear are flawed, and anyone suggesting as much deserves to be sneered at. I think it's wholly irresponsible to sneer at the evidence. The evidence that we have in this field, in the name of being responsible to our clients. I also do not think it's cool or clever to be anti-intellectual, especially if you're supposed to be a forward-thinking, responsible hypnotherapist. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. In particular, when I'm running and training for running events, I'm currently pausing my listening hours of textbooks and study materials, and I'm indulging in my love of fantasy novels and epic sci-fi. I'm currently listening to a brilliant book called The Dawn of Wonder, The Awakening by an author called Jonathan Renshaw. I'm in love with it. In a middle chapter, there's a group of boys that are training at an academy. They're gossiping and reflecting upon the coming days, and a phrase was spoken that rang true with me and with the issues at the heart of what I'm talking about here. And it went like this: speculation holds more wonder than fact. There it was. Perhaps a sense of awe-inspiring wonder is causing the anti-intellectualism. Maybe that is it. Maybe the myth and misconception, the speculating about what hypnosis can and cannot do, the allure of the fantastical is why people in these fields reject the sober evidence base. I think they need to consider stopping being so starry-eyed, just for a short while though, especially if we want to gain credibility as a field. Who knows? Who knows? Let's ensure the field of hypnosis does not turn into one of those typical high school 80s movie scenarios whereby the jocks, athletes and the good-looking cheerleaders refer to the well-educated as nerds, dweebs or dorks and attempt to belittle, dissociate, mock or angrily silence the voices of those who desire a more thoroughly educated life. Let's not let the cult of anti-intellectualism soak into our field for another generation. I want to thank President Obama for that video clip. When I watched that clip, it proved to be some wonderful tonic to me. Every time I replay it, it feels like smelling salts being wafted under my nose. Remember, please remember.